Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. Pat Sanaghan is here from a very excellent book called How to Be a Better Procrastinator. And Pat is going to blow the doors wide open about this thing called procrastination because you might be wondering about motivation or discipline or strategies or wondering if you're lazy. We're going to change some minds, get some insights. We have the man, the myth, the legend, the master here, Mr. Pat Sanaghan. So, Pat, how the heck are you?
I'm doing well, Robert. How you doing?
I am fantastic now that I'm talking to you. And this is always a fun subject, right? Because the brain is so slippery and weird, and sometimes we play tricks on ourselves, but so many times you get back to the fundamentals, right? You write the little bit of a task list and you go through that activity of like moving the hand and crossing tasks out and
Yep.
having the self-awareness, accountability. There's all these tools at our disposal, but in your own words, what's the problem in front of us? Like, what is procrastination? Why can't we get things done?
Yeah, procrastination really is an emotional management issue, right? Usually there's something that you have to do that's noxious or uncomfortable or overwhelming, and you get lots of feelings around anxiety and stress, and I can't do it. And the minute you step away from the task, emotionally, you feel relief. And that's the hook, that's the habit. So for me, I don't like to do income taxes. No one does, but I really have I'm a very productive procrastinator. That's why I wrote the book. You can be a very productive procrastinator. But around income taxes, I still have difficulties, and I've come up with a number of strategies I can use to get me through it. Not to enjoy it, not to do it exactly on time all the time, but to get through this noxious task and manage my emotions when I can. So there's a lot of strategies that are really useful for people.
Wonderful. So let's talk about some strategies. And that's a
Yep.
really good insight right off the bat that there's the emotion involved. And when you jump into the income taxes, you hate it. When you jump away from it, you get the relief. So you get
Right.
kind of what you get like sort of a reward kind of
Absolutely.
thing happening in there. And then I know that you're big in education and universities. And I just have all these bad memories of having to do these stupid assignments and stupid essays. But we're humans, we're adults. The point is not to be happy all the time, but to
Right.
be productive and get things done. So you have all these strategies. Is there one that you think is especially relevant these days?
Yeah, I think that there's three that I'd like to share that have been kind of guiding principles for the last 30 years. I got caught writing a dissertation, but I wasn't writing it. I was reading it. I was just doing more and more and more research. But at the end of the day, if you don't write it, you don't get a doctorate, right? So I have a doctorate
Right.
because I finally got it done. But I had to get an extension, right? I had 7 years. I still had to get another 1 year extension. And they said, you better finish it now, buddy, or you're out of here. So I had a lot of motivation. I asked a lot of people who had finished their dissertation, which is always a good thing for a procrastinator to do. Don't do everything by yourself. Ask for help, get some advice. And the three things that they came up with were powerful, and I've used them all my career. One is make your progress visible somehow. So, like you showed your little to do list, my to do list is a big yellow thing I do every day. And when I do something, I score it out with big black marker and it feels wonderful. So then I know number two, number three. So I don't have 15 things on my to do list. I used to have 10, which is nutty. I have six. And if I can get to five or six, I've had a great day. But this whole visual thing, it's yellow. I can see it across the room and scoring it out. The second thing is chewable chunks. I thought you had to sit down and just punch out 7, 8 hours of writing. And all my colleagues said, "Oh, you're nutty. Do 30 minutes at a time and take a break. 30 minutes at a time and take a break." So that's a real important thing for procrastinators to realize. You don't have to sit there and punch it out because you're probably not going to. You're going to run out of energy or motivation. But 10 minutes to begin something is really important. And then the third one, and this is something I resisted, Robert, is they all had rewards set up for when they finished a chapter. And I said, well, do you really need rewards? Shouldn't I be more mature than that, more disciplined? And they said, no, you're going to need rewards because it's a long haul. It's a marathon. It's a noxious task. And so one of my buddies who did finish, he had golfing outings, not just like in a neighborhood community golfing thing. He'd fly someplace in Palm Springs or down in Florida and spend 3 days golfing, which he loved to do after each chapter. That reward map enabled him to be successful. So the three things is chewable chunks, little at a time, make your progress visible, and rewards do work. And don't get into this thing, I shouldn't need rewards. Rewards work. Those are three.
I like it. And it's simple and it needs to be simple, right? And it's I
Absolutely.
think that too many of us play these mind games with ourselves and think we can just punch through it and sit it out and get it all done. But some of these are maybe emotionally counterintuitive, right? Like the
Yep.
idea of kind of pacing yourself in a way, doing the chunks, doing 30 minutes off and then some time off and then back on. It gives you reminders to like when like the police would like chase the criminals on horseback, right? And they would just like walk the horse for an hour, but then jump back on and go fast. And
Right.
overall, they would have something more sustained and they would go greater distances.
Right.
But it's in the moment you're like, well, I got off the horse and I'm walking it slowly. You feel like in the moment, like it's not happening very quickly. And so, this is all great pieces of advice, actionable, doable. But as far as your own personal kind of like difficulties, right? You mentioned about the dissertation. Has there been a moment in your professional or academic career when you were just at the end of your rope, where you're like, I'm not even going to finish this. I'm going to flunk out. I'll be completely
Oh,
a failure. Have you ever like really been in panic mode?
oh, absolutely. In that dissertation, then they gave you a 1 year extension. You spend all your time and money and courses and exams, and 50% of people who start PhD programs in this country do not finish. They do all the hard work, but they don't get to the dissertation and complete it. So there's a big hurdle there, and I was very panicky. And once I had these three little strategies that I got from my colleagues who had finished, um, it made it. It wasn't easy, but I broke through. I wrote 3 chapters in the semester, and they said, "Okay, you're making progress." And I just kept on going and going and going and going. The thing which is really important is, you said it earlier, Robert. Procrastinators are not lazy. I am not a lazy person. I've written 12 books, about 50 published articles. I have a great consulting business, and there's some things I procrastinate on. So they're not lazy. And the difference is this: lazy people don't feel guilt or anxiety or stress. They just, it's okay, we'll do it tomorrow. But procrastinators know, oh, geez, I know I have to do that thing, and I really can't enjoy the moment now because I got to do that. So that's the difference between lazy people and procrastinators. Most procrastinators are not lazy people.
And that's a good insight there, that if you have that little bit of stress and anxiety, or hopefully a healthy dose of it, not too much, but if you
Not too
are a
much.
little bit anxious, it means that, well, you're on the right track. At least you're trying to do the right thing. And I had a discussion a few years ago about, I was worried about like, well, am I a good enough parent, right? Am I a good
Yeah.
dad? And the guy said, well, just the fact that you're thinking about it is a
Yes.
really good sign, because your parents or grandparents, they're probably just blazing ahead and doing whatever the heck they want to do without any of this kind of self-awareness. And so, stress and anxiety, it's a real problem, right? In a lot of us. And
Yes.
many times I've noticed, like sometimes my wife and I call it the not working guilties. If we're just like
Yeah.
sitting and watching like one episode of TV and we're like, oh, I could have squeezed in half an hour.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've noticed I sometimes like put the anxiety at like the front of my timeline. I kind of like use anxiety to like push the action taking, and I know that's bad. And so, what do you have to say about something like that? Like, what's your
We got
relationship with
frozen
stress
there.
and anxiety? And like, how do we cope better without losing our momentum?
Yep. And sometimes it's important to just name the emotion. Right now, I'm feeling anxious. It lessens the power of it. Right now, I'm feeling overwhelmed. It lessens the power of it. Doesn't go away. It just lessens the power. So how you manage that is great. There's two other things that enabled me to do my income tax, and it's something a real powerful concept. It's called temptation bundling. And what that means, you take something positive and you marry it with something negative. So if you don't like exercising, you exercise with a friend, right? Make it a social activity. You don't like doing the laundry, you watch TV while you're ironing the laundry. You marry something nice with something that's not so nice. So when I do my income taxes, and this past year I did it in the middle of March, which is almost a first for me. And years ago I paid penalties. I haven't paid penalties in about 20 years. So I know I'm making progress. Still get stressed, still get anxiety, and still aggravating. But this notion of temptation bundling is powerful, and what I do is I watch sports while I do the income taxes. So I'm a big
I,
sports fan. I love football. It takes me a lot longer. See, people say, oh, it takes too long. It doesn't take too long. My job is to finish. So if it takes me theoretically 8 hours, it might take me 24 hours over 5 or 6 days watching basketball, watching football, watching, whatever, golf, enjoying myself and doing a little bit of work, enjoying myself and do a little bit of work. And at the end of it, you're having a cold beer or a glass of wine so you can reward yourself. If you're not an alcoholic.
And that's a good insight right there, that there's these keywords like efficiency, right? And you
No.
think that, well, I
Yeah.
need to maximize my speed. And you're saying that, well, sometimes if there's a pressing task in front of you, it's not necessarily about how quickly you finish, it's can you finish it all? And so the temptation bundling, it may take a little bit extra time, but you get things done that you
Absolutely.
otherwise wouldn't have noticed. And though I store that in my brain as there was a Tony Robbins story one time where he had to make some kind of phone calls, and he like got in the hot tub, and that was back when phones had the long cord, so
Oh
he just
wow.
like made all these phone calls in the hot tub. And like, sometimes we'll play music or something while getting stuff done. And so similar idea, right, is mix
Absolutely.
in a little bit of the pleasure. That way it's not all work. And so you conquered the income tax issue, you wrote your dissertation. Is there anything that is still iffy for you nowadays? Or is there anything that you still procrastinate on or still struggle
Yeah.
with?
I'm on a road a lot, 150, 60 days a year. And in one trip, the last trip I made, I was on 3 different campuses. And so each campus has different invoicing things. You have to do mileage and meals and airplanes, and it's hell. And I put it all the receipts kind of in a box. I'm still a paper guy. I mean, a lot of these people just do ding, ding, ding on their iPhone and everything's fine. It's just not me. And I collect all these things, and then I kind of look at this big bucket and say, "Oh, geez, let me do that tomorrow." But if you don't do the invoice, you don't get paid. So there's a little bit of a motivation in there. So it's still something I struggle with. Those two things are things, but I've got all these strategies. Let me just share one with you, okay?
Okay.
Mark Twain is a pretty famous guy, and he said something I think was a very bad misdirection. He said, "When there's two frogs that you have to eat, which is not a nice task, eat the big one first." And with procrastinators, now other people might be able to tackle that. Procrastinators will never eat the big frog first, but they might eat the small frog or the small task first. And they do it in chewable chunks. They have some rewards set up. They do it with some friends, and they get through and accomplish something that really builds their motivation and their confidence. And then they might say, okay, I can use some of these things I've used to tackle the big task. So if you got two tasks, I'd say for the small one first, because you'll build success, you'll build some strategies, and you'll get some momentum going forward.
And so along this idea, this kind of thread we're on about momentum and confidence, I find sometimes I put in I'm maybe superstition is the way that I call it. There's certain like recurring tasks I have, such as the podcast I'm doing with you right now here, right? I
Yep.
do a few per week, and
Yep.
it's added up to over 1,000. But I
That's
tell myself, there's weeks where I'm just like, maybe I should clear the schedule, just focus on the deep work. But I tell myself I need to at least fit in a few of the podcast meetings such as this because I want to keep the muscle going. I want to stay
yeah.
in my game. And I'm worried that if I let too many weeks pass, then I'll lose the momentum, lose the confidence. Do you have any ideas on that as
No,
far as like keeping
I
that
think
momentum going?
I think you're doing exactly what you need to do. I mean, the deep work is a nice concept. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with it. It's pretty privileged and elite. It's very powerful. I mean, I'm not saying it's a negative thing. A lot of people don't have 4 or 5 hours where they can break it out. You're a dad, you got a kid running around doing some things. There goes your deep work. But you have to craft some opportunities for you to do the work you're doing. And you're doing, I mean, that's amazing. 1,000 podcasts, well, not over a long period of time, but that's a library of great stuff. It is one at a time. So just paying attention to that on a intermittent fashion or every once in a while, I think you got your game down. Absolutely.
And
So
so
congratulations. A lot of work.
oh, thank you very much. It's always good to have that positivity and that reassurance. And we all wish that we had more time to do those things. But like you're saying, like sometimes it's like, well, you fit it in when you can. And so have you had any kind of like time management difficulties such as that? Have you like played around with your schedule and like
Oh
figured
yeah,
out what works?
it took me a long time to get my schedule. I think I mentioned to you years ago. I used to have 10 things on my to do list, and a buddy of mine said, "Why do you have 10 things?" And I said, "Isn't that what you're supposed to do?" And I wrote a book on time management 25 years ago. And he said, "I don't do more than 5 or 6." I said, "Really?" And this guy much more successful than me. I said, "You got to be kidding me." He says, "Yeah." So try it for a week. And that's exactly what I've done. I only have no more than 5 or 6. So that's how I kind of manage my to do list. But here's something that's really important. A guy just passed. His name is Daniel Kahneman, and he's written a bunch of very famous books. He won the Nobel Prize. I mean, he's a bright guy. And he said the two things you have to remember is when you take a task. I apologize. Uh, it usually takes longer and it's harder. And that's a very powerful notion because sometimes you say, "Oh, I can do that in a week," when you really can probably do it in 3 weeks. So we're very bad at deadlines, and we're all oftentimes very over aspirational. But I have that in my office on the wall. It'll take longer, and 98% of the time it does. Like an email, I just punch out an email, and an hour later I'm done it because I'm double checking this and making sure it's fluid. Da, 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 da. Well, that's an hour out of my day. It's not a 5 or 10 minute task. So it takes longer, and it's usually kind of It's harder. That's where you need other folks to help you. You need buddies, you need thought partners, you need accountability partners, whatever you can do to kind of move things forward. And one last thing, we got to get rid of this notion around the sports analogies. We talk about the sports and excellence in the Olympics in 5.2 seconds. There's 1,000 coaches for those guys and gals. You ever look at a football team? I played football, college football, and we had 55 coaches for 22 players. I mean, you don't have a coach in your life. You don't have someone saying, Robert, you should take a timeout now, and we'll kind of do a brainstorm. You got to keep on doing what you're doing. So get rid of these sports kinds of things, or these world class athletes, which I respect a great deal. I love sports, but it messes people's minds up. Well, how come I can't do that? How come I can't swim 6 days a week, 7 hours a day? Well, that's a guy who also had mental health problems. And he's a great guy. He's an Olympic champion. He's a mental health advocate now, but he paid a price for that kind of rigor and discipline. So just being conscious of that. Does that make sense at all?
It does, that it's something to perhaps aspire to, but it's not necessarily practical in our daily life. And the way through is to use all these different tools in the toolbox, like you've been mentioning, right? Like the chewable chunks and the
Yep.
accountability and the rewards and all these other things. And I can definitely relate to what you're talking about. Like I come from a software background where there's a thing called the iceberg principle, where to
Right.
make a piece of software that it works about 10% is good, but it's full of bugs. That's
Yep.
quick. But then the actual long work is the debugging and making it work well, and your brain feels like it slows down, right? Because you
Yep.
you get the prototype working, but then actually make it actually work in actuality. And then I've narrated a few of your audiobooks, and me and my wife are all the time being like, oh, we can finish this book in 3 days, and then next thing you know, it's 3 weeks later, and
Right.
I play games with myself because I tell myself, well, if I didn't give myself that close of a deadline, then the time it would take to do it might then balloon up. So it's a lot to navigate.
Absolutely. And we're bad at deadlines, by the way, and that's where a thought partner can be helpful. So I said, well, I can get that paper done in a week. That's usually my mental model. I'm just writing a paper with a colleague of mine in New Mexico, great scholar. And we've gone through our fourth draft. And we've written a lot of stuff, right? And you think, oh, we just kind of put something together. We're really smart people and we'll get it done. Now we're on our fourth draft. We'll do one more before we put it into the publisher. That's taken hours and hours and hours and hours. So it's just that we're not real good at that. That's where someone else can say, well, Pat, when's the last time you wrote a paper? Well, it was last October. And how long did it take? Oh, that took me 3 weeks. Well, maybe you shouldn't try to do it in a week. Maybe 3 weeks is your better deadline. So that's where these thought partners who don't agree with you all the time, they can't be like mind meld. They can't be your buddy that says, oh, don't worry, Robert, I think you're right. It's got to be someone who can push your thinking a little bit and say, what evidence do you have that that's only going to take that much time? I painted a house one time years ago. I thought it'd be a long weekend. It took me 4 weeks because I never painted a house before, and I'm on ladders and doing this and doing that. So getting some advice, getting some help would really be helpful. Another thing that's really important is for procrastinators, starting is the hardest part, right? Starting is the hardest
Right.
part. So you've got to make it easy somehow, that kind of trick your brain. You mentioned that earlier about starting. So there's two things you can do with starting. One is to have a routine. So I'll give you an example. I walk 10,000 steps a day when I'm home. When I'm on the road, it's a little bit harder. And when I first started thinking about that stuff, it was in the winter time. And so I get up in the morning, have a cup of coffee. I'm going to go out and walk. And I'm saying, okay, now where are my gloves? And do I need a hat today? Oh, no, it's raining. And I just sat down and said, let me have another cup of coffee. I gave up. And so a buddy of mine was helping me. He says, well, you should have all your stuff organized in a specific space in your house. And I said, really? He said, yeah, I have my shoes, my pants, my gloves, whatever I need for the next day is already there. It takes me 2 minutes. And I said, that's amazing. So every morning when I get up, I have a cup of coffee to kind of wake up. And it takes me a minute to dress, and I'm out the door. So that routine is really helpful. So if you can build a routine, that's really good. And a ritual is something that puts you in a psychological state. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. For some people, it's music. For me, music is distracting. I know I've got colleagues, if they're not blaring music, they can't concentrate. Me, it just blows me away. But music sometimes meditating right before you do an activity. I have one colleague who lights a little bit of incense, and just smelling the sage just puts her in a mental state where she's ready to work. So routines and rituals can be really helpful because starting, and we also know that about 50% of the time, if you start something, you'll continue. Not finish it, but you'll continue. So those are pretty good odds. If you kind of start something, you'll keep on moving forward. So it's just important for procrastinators and everyone else. Listen, 20 to 25% of adults in this country have procrastination as a chronic habit. So that's tens of millions of people. and they delay their income tax returns. They delay going to the doctor. I got a friend of mine who does colonoscopies, a doctor friend. He has about a 15% cancellation rate a day before the people come in for the colonoscopy because they get all anxious and upset and they delay it again for another year. And that's a pretty dangerous thing to do. So the procrastinators can really pay a price emotionally and pay a price physically if they don't kind of begin to manage their procrastination. Is this helpful?
It is helpful. There are real consequences, and making a change is not instant, but the first step is knowing that this problem exists and
Yeah.
strive to be a little bit better and manage your expectations to some of these hard truths about life. But it seems like a kind of there's some recurring themes of what we're talking about here, right? There's have a buddy, make
Yep.
sure your thinking is not just on your own. And
Yep.
I really like your advice there on just starting. There's been so many times where I'm like, let me just get the document open. Let me just set a timer for 5 minutes and let me
Five
just get
minutes.
a little bit on here. And then I end up doing more than 5 minutes. I end up making more progress. And as far as like the routine, I mean, some people sleep in their workout clothes, right? That way they wake up and go right out the door, and you figure out what works for you. And having a few routines
Help.
doesn't mean your whole life has to be a routine. It's just if there's this problem and the other strategies have not worked, you haven't stuck with it,
You
then
got it.
maybe it's time to apply one of these. And so, as we're winding down our conversation, we want to make sure we get to the good stuff, but also we leave people wanting more. So, is there a hidden question in our conversation? There's something about motivation, productivity
Let's talk
that I'm
about,
not asking you that you wish I would?
yeah, no, let's talk about motivation. Uh, the problem with procrastinators is they say, well, I want to feel motivated before I do it. And I'm never going to feel motivated to do my income taxes, ever. So what you have to do is an action creates energy, and that creates motivation, right? So if you act, you get some energy kind of going, and the motivation will show up. And there's a big name in academia, a guy named Roy Baumeister, and he wrote a book called Motivation. He's one of the world's experts in it. And when I read it, I said, this is what my suspicion was. People say, oh, you're not motivated. You got to get your guts up there. He says, motivation is a very small resource. It's like a small battery that gets worn out with use. And it's not a big pool. You don't have a big pool in your backyard and just grab a lot of buckets of motivation and kind of move things forward. It's a very tiny resource. So his advice is you got to use it strategically. So for some people, starting is where they got to use it. Okay, let me just do it. Let's grind through it. Some people it's in the middle. For me, it's the end, the last mile, like this editing thing in the fourth draft. That's the tough stuff for me. Now I talked to my partner about that. So listen, I can produce a lot of stuff and I'll enjoy working with you, but you got to know that last mile of really kind of getting it edited really quickly is an area of concern of mine. But that's when I use my motivation to kind of pump it through. And then I also don't want to disappoint a colleague I respect a great deal. So the motivation myth is it's not a lot of motivation out there. It's small. So try to use it very strategically when you know you need some help.
That's a very helpful insight that there's that myth that motivation is all of it and that there's so much of it and I can't do anything unless I have it. And you're saying like it's a very small battery and it really helps to have the self-awareness of know what's easy for you, what's hard for you, where you need help. And that way in the roller coaster of say working through all those drafts, well, are you excited the most about finishing? Some people are excited most about the middle or the beginning. So
Yep,
know yourself, know your strengths and weaknesses,
yep.
know which strategies to use, and know where to get help. And so now that we've kind of had this little bit of a discussion, gotten people interested about productivity and everything that's surrounding with it, what's some next steps here? You mentioned about yourself and your book. So where should someone go to after listening to our conversation?
Well, I hope they go to Amazon books, and I think it's going to show up reverse, I guess. It's called How to Be a Better Procrastinator. It's not expensive. I think it's $6.99 for a Kindle and $10.99 for a paperback. It's a very practical. It's very easy to read, and I wrote it for procrastinators because I am one. So procrastinators aren't going to probably start at page one. They'll go like this. Let me see. Let me see. And every page, you got a little nugget of a strategy that you can use. Some people start at the. In fact, about 20% of people start at the back of the book when they start reading. Well, I got stuff in the back of the book on lessons learned about procrastination. So it's really meant for you to take 10 minutes of your life and read something. And then I think you'll continue to get some real effective strategies. So it's all been research based and they work. And the other thing is don't be over aspirational and say, oh, I'll do this one and this one and this one and this one. If you do one, try it for a week and see what happens. And then do a second one. But don't try to do four or five. We we tend to go overboard, procrastinators, and just do one. It'll make a difference.
Well, they call that self-sabotage, right?
Yeah.
When you say, "I'll do all these things," and then I've overloaded myself and I'll get nothing done. So it's time to break some habits and get some new results. And the first step to doing that is to get that excellent book, How to Be a Better Procrastinator by Pat Sanaghan. That last name is spelled Sanaghan. And as we wrap up our conversation here, Pat, I want to make sure to get one last little quotable soundbite nugget. And I like to put my guests on the spot and ask for a helpful quote or lesson that can get us excited and send us on our way. So, what comes to mind to you as far as a helpful quote or lesson?
I think the lesson is this, Robert. Self criticism is not effective. There's no research that I've been aware of, and I've done hundreds of hours of research. The beating yourself up and say, "I wish I was smarter. I shouldn't be so weak. I shouldn't." When you start getting into the shoulds, you're in trouble. So self criticism tends not to be helpful. Self compassion does work. And I did that research with college students, the ones that said, okay, I messed up this semester. Next semester, I'll do better. And when they did that, they did a lot better. So self compassion. I'm not a touchy feely person. I'm just saying, okay, I kind of messed up this time. Tomorrow's a new day, or this afternoon is a new opportunity for me to do a little writing, and not to beat yourself up, because it just does not work. It does. So get rid of those military models about being critical and doing this, and you're not a man, and whatever those things are. It doesn't help you being productive and effective and happy. You want to be a happy dad, right? I mean, you don't want to be worried all the time.
Perfect.
So if you're a happy person, you're going to be a great father.
Yeah, and so that's a good habit to unlearn and then relearn better, right? Of knowing that you can be kind to yourself and still be responsible. And the very next step to make that happen is to get that book, How to Be a Better Procrastinator by Pat Sanahan. Did you have one last thing to say, Pat?
Yeah, good luck, folks. Just try one thing. Don't beat yourselves up. And don't forget about those rewards. I mean, I fought that for almost 6 months, saying I should be more mature and I shouldn't need it. And everyone who completed it said, Pat, rewards. So I could be kind of stubborn and hard headed. So, whatever, even if it's counterintuitive, just try it and see what happens.
Very nice. So reward yourself, and the first reward should be How to Be a Better
There you
Procrastinator
go.
by Pat Sanahan. Get it on Amazon.
Thank you, Rob.